I'm Jeremy Lafredo for Rebel News, and behind me is the Canadian mission to the United Nations. According to a recent BBC report, Mohammed al-Rasheed, on behalf of the Canadian intelligence apparatus, facilitated the travel of men, women, and children to the ISIS-controlled regions of Syria, where they then joined the notorious terrorist organization. According to a BBC-obtained dossier on the Canadian intelligence asset, during his operation of bringing people to join ISIS, he communicated directly with believed to be notorious ISIS recruiter Rafi al-Haste. "I need you to work under me. Officially, I want you to bring us people in," he told al-Rasheed. Al-Rasheed, officially working for the Canadian embassy in Jordan, replied, "I am ready, brother." The explosive BBC report centered around the case of UK citizen Shamina Begum, a girl who was 15 at the time that she was brought to Syria to join ISIS by al-Rasheed. After the 15-year-old was brought to ISIS, she was married and gave birth to 3 children, all of which died as babies from various illnesses stemming from the war the terrorist organization was waging against Bashar al-Assad's government in Syria. While bringing people to fight alongside ISIS, al-Rasheed was documenting the names and IDs of people he was bringing and sharing that intelligence with the Canadian embassy in Jordan, who, according to al-Rasheed, promised him Canadian citizenship. While bizarre, his story is not an isolated incident. It follows the pattern of Western intelligence agencies and governments facilitating support for the same Islamic terrorist organizations that they claim to be against. In leaked U.S. State Department emails obtained by WikiLeaks, Hillary Clinton aide and current National Security Advisor for the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, sent an email to Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of State, stating bluntly that al-Qaeda is, quote, "on our side in Syria." A leaked U.S. Embassy cable assessed that the Assad government's vulnerabilities included the potential threat from an increasing presence of transiting Islamic extremists, and detailed how the U.S. could improve the likelihood of such opportunities arising. In other words, improve the likelihood of the referenced Islamist extremists of destroying the Syrian government. And the U.S. and their allies in the region did just that. In a speech at Harvard, President Joe Biden explained bluntly that the U.S. and its allies were spending hundreds of millions of dollars on weapons for terrorists.
We poured hundreds of millions of dollars and tens, thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world.
It was part of an official, but at the time covert war President Barack Obama's CIA launched, codenamed Timber Sycamore, which allowed direct U.S. arming and training of Islamic extremists in Syria. As the New York Times put it in 2017, the program proved to be one of the costliest covert action programs in the history of the CIA. Anonymous U.S. officials told the Washington Post that the CIA armed and trained nearly 10,000 terrorists, spending roughly $100,000 of taxpayer money per year for every anti-Assad terrorist who went through the program. But these terrorists, or so-called rebels, were not just killing pro-Syrian government forces. As the New York Times reported, US-backed insurgents carried out, quote, sectarian mass murder. In response to these horrific operations and failed strategies to bring the Assad government to its knees, Representative Tulsi Gabbard, former U.S. military personnel who recently guest-hosted Tucker Carlson Tonight, introduced the Stop Arming Terrorists Act into Congress, which would have, quote, prohibited the use of United States government funds to provide assistance to al-Qaeda and ISIS. Although it had bipartisan support of 14 U.S. representatives, it never made it past the House. The recent history of our government supporting terrorism to advance geopolitical goals is emblematic of how empty and morally corrupt the political establishment is. After criticizing the US-funded proxy war in Syria on the campaign trail, President Trump shut down the CIA's Timber Sycamore program for good in July 2017. It turns out it's a lot of al-Qaeda we're giving these weapons to, Trump told the Wall Street Journal. While the recent story of a Canadian intelligence asset bringing teens to Syria to fight for ISIS seems bizarre, it's only a matter of time before more and more stories come out of our political leaders spending taxpayer funds to facilitate terrorism. For Rebel News in New York City, I'm Jeremy Lafredo. If you don't think the corrupt WHO should be exercising its power over supposedly sovereign nations, go to nopandemiccreaty.com and sign our petition. That's No Pandemic Treaty.